I never thought my life would unravel on a Tuesday afternoon in October, with autumn leaves dancing outside my bedroom window like they were mocking me. The irony wasn't lost on me later. How something so beautiful could frame something so ugly. My name is Marcus, and at 34, I thought I had it all figured out. A successful marketing firm, a beautiful wife named Elena, and what I believed was the perfect family dynamic with my younger brother Danny. We'd grown up thick as thieves, started our family's construction business together, and I'd even been his best man 2 years ago. But that Tuesday, coming home early with a splitting headache and fever, I discovered that the two people I trusted most in this world had been systematically destroying me from the inside out. The house felt different when I walked in. There was an energy, a tension that made my skin crawl, even before my rational mind could process what was happening. I called out Elena's name, my voice echoing through our supposedly empty home. No response. But I could hear something, muffled sounds coming from upstairs, from our bedroom. My legs felt like lead as I climbed those stairs. Each step seemed to take forever, and yet I arrived at our bedroom door far too quickly. The door was slightly ajar, and through that sliver of space I saw my entire world collapse. Elena was there, her long, dark hair spread across our wedding quilt, the one her grandmother had made for us, but she wasn't alone. Danny was with her, moving with a familiarity that told me this wasn't their first time. This wasn't some spontaneous moment of weakness. This was routine. This was comfort. This was betrayal so deep it had roots. The sound that escaped my throat wasn't quite human. It was something primal, guttural, the sound of a man's soul being ripped from his chest. They froze, turned toward the door, and I saw their faces. Elena's eyes went wide with terror. But Danny? Danny looked almost relieved, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Marcus," Elena whispered, scrambling to cover herself with our sheets. "It's not what it looks like." But Danny just stared at me with those same green eyes we'd inherited from our father, and he said the words that would haunt me for years. "Actually, Marcus, it's exactly what it looks like." The room spun. My fever spiked, or maybe it was just rage cooking me from the inside out. I stumbled backward, my hand finding my phone in my pocket. Without thinking, I started recording. Some survival instinct took over. The same instinct that had made me successful in business. Document everything. Protect yourself. Gather evidence. Elena was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks like black tears. "Marcus, please, let me explain." "How? Long." My voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of thunder. Danny stood up, completely naked, completely unashamed. 2 years, brother. Since right after her birthday party. You remember the one where you were too busy with work to show up until midnight? The knife twisted deeper. I remembered that night. I'd been closing a major deal, working late to provide for our future, for our family. While I was building our life, they were tearing it apart. My phone was still recording when something inside me snapped. I rushed forward, and Danny, caught off guard and vulnerable, went down hard when I drove my knee into his ribs. He doubled over, gasping, and I found myself kicking him while he was down. Elena screamed, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears like war drums. "Marcus, stop!" Elena grabbed my arm, her touch burning like acid. "You're going to kill him!" I stopped, not because of her words, but because I looked down and saw my brother curled on the floor, blood trickling from his mouth, and I realized I didn't recognize the man I'd become in that moment. The fever, the rage, the betrayal, it had turned me into someone I didn't want to be. The hours that followed were a blur of phone calls, packing, and soul-crushing realizations. I called my lawyer first, a sharp woman named Patricia who'd handled our business contracts. Her voice was professional but kind when I explained the situation. "Document everything, Marcus. Photos, videos, timestamps. And don't do anything stupid." Elena tried calling 17 times that first night. 17 times I watched her name flash on my screen and felt my heart break a little more. Finally, I answered. "Marcus, please, we need to talk. This doesn't have to destroy everything." "Doesn't have to destroy everything?" I laughed, but it came out bitter and hollow. "Elena, you and my brother have been fucking in our bed for 2 years. What exactly is left to destroy?" "Don't be crude." My voice rose. "You're worried about my language?" You've been spreading your legs for my brother in the bed where we made love, where we planned our future, where I told you I wanted to have children with you, and you're worried about my fucking language?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I never meant for you to find out this way." Which way would have been better? A PowerPoint presentation? Maybe a family dinner announcement? Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you just going to keep playing house with me while you played house with him? Then, what is it like, Elena? Please enlighten me. What's it like to lie to someone's face every single day? What's it like to kiss me goodbye in the morning and then call my brother the second I'm out the door? What's it like to look at me across the dinner table and pretend you're not counting the minutes until you can be with him? The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was how everything suddenly made sense. All those late evenings when she said she was with her sister. All those times Danny couldn't make our weekly drinks because he was busy with work. All those knowing glances I'd caught between them that I'd dismissed as sibling affection. I'd been living in a carefully constructed lie, and I'd been too trusting, too naive, too fucking stupid to see it. The next few days brought a parade of people trying to manage the situation. My parents called, their voices strained with the particular exhaustion that comes from family drama. "Marcus, son," my father said, "your mother and I think maybe you should consider counseling. For everyone involved." Counseling? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Dad, they betrayed me. They've been betraying me for 2 years. These things happen, son. Marriage is complicated. Family is complicated. These things happen?" I felt that familiar rage building again. Is that what you told yourself when Uncle Robert cheated on Aunt Sarah? Is that what you'll tell yourself when it's your son doing the cheating? My mother took the phone. "Marcus, honey, Danny feels terrible about this. And Elena, she's confused. Sometimes people make mistakes when they're not getting what they need at home." The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. It was my fault. I wasn't giving Elena what she needed, so she had to get it from my brother. My own mother was blaming me for their betrayal. "It's exactly what you're saying, Mom. I worked 60-hour weeks to build a business that employs half our family, including Danny. I worked my ass off to give Elena everything she wanted. The house, the vacations, the security. And when she decides to fuck my brother instead of talking to me about whatever she wasn't getting, that's somehow my fault?" That's when I knew. My own family was going to choose them over me. They were going to rationalize it, minimize it, make excuses for it, and expect me to just accept it for the sake of family harmony. Danny called later that same day. I almost didn't answer, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. "Angry," I laughed. "Danny, angry is what I get when someone cuts me off in traffic. What I feel toward you transcends anger. It's something deeper, something that doesn't have a name." "Which way did you mean for it to happen? Were you planning to wait until after we had kids? Maybe make it a Christmas surprise? Hey, Marcus, guess what? Your children aren't really yours. Then what is it like? And don't give me some bullshit about true love, because if you loved her, you would have come to me first. If you respected me at all, you would have been honest." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She was lonely, Marcus. You were never around. I was building a life for us. For all of us. The business that pays your salary, Danny. The house Elena loves. The future we were planning. I was working to make all of that possible. No, you know what? I'm done. I'm filing for divorce. I'm removing you from the business. And I'm getting as far away from all of you as possible. The business is mine, Danny. I started it. I built it. I own controlling interest. And family? You stopped being my family the first time you put your hands on my wife." I hung up and immediately called Patricia. Within a week, the divorce papers were filed, and I'd restructured the business to remove Danny from any decision-making role. It felt like cutting off my own arm, but sometimes amputation is the only way to stop the infection from spreading. 3 weeks after discovery, I sat in a diner at 2 a.m, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The initial shock had faded, replaced by something harder, more focused. I'd spent weeks drowning in self-pity and rage, but sitting there in that fluorescent-lit tomb, I realized something crucial. They expected me to disappear quietly. They expected me to just fade away and let them live happily ever after in the ruins of my life. I started planning meticulously. The first step was understanding my assets and leverage points. I owned 60% of the construction company, which had grown substantially over the past 5 years. We had contracts with the city, several major developers, and a solid reputation. Danny owned 20%, and our parents owned the remaining 20% through their retirement investment. I also had the recordings and photos from that day. Elena didn't know I'd documented everything, and Danny sure as hell didn't know. But I needed more than evidence of infidelity. I needed to understand the full scope of their deception, so I hired a private investigator, a former cop named Rodriguez who specialized in marital cases. I need to know everything, I told him. Every meeting, every lie, every detail. I need to understand exactly how deep this goes. Rodriguez was thorough. Within 2 weeks, he had a comprehensive timeline that made my stomach turn. The affair hadn't started 2 years ago, like Danny claimed. It had been going on for almost 3 years. It began during Elena's girls' trip to Miami, where Danny had coincidentally been working on a project. Hotel records showed they'd shared a room. She hadn't told me yet, probably trying to figure out whose child it was. The investigator had found pregnancy test receipts, prenatal vitamin purchases, and an appointment with an OB/GYN scheduled for the following week. I sat in my lawyer's office, staring at the report, feeling something break inside me that I didn't know could break twice. "Marcus," Patricia said gently, "I know this is difficult, but we need to discuss strategy. If she's pregnant, it could complicate the divorce proceedings. We can request paternity testing, but it will need to be handled carefully." That night, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my life. I wasn't going to just divorce Elena and remove Danny from the business. I was going to disappear completely, rebuild myself into someone stronger, and then come back when I was ready to truly make them pay for what they'd done. I started researching opportunities that would take me far away from the wreckage of my old life. That's when I found information about the Army Corps of Engineers. They were looking for experienced construction managers for overseas projects, infrastructure development in post-conflict zones. It was dangerous work, but it paid well, and most importantly, it would give me the distance and time I needed to plan properly. I spent the next month liquidating assets, transferring money to accounts Elena didn't know about, and setting up a trust that would manage my business interests while I was gone. I also made sure Rodriguez continued his investigation, with instructions to document everything my family did while I was away. The hardest part was the waiting. Elena finally told me about the pregnancy on a rainy Thursday evening, sitting in our lawyer's office during what was supposed to be a routine divorce negotiation. I looked at her across that polished conference table, this woman I'd loved completely, and felt nothing but cold calculation. "Because for 3 years, you've been fucking my brother. Because you've lied to me about everything else, so why would this be different?" Elena's lawyer, a thin man with nervous energy, started talking about complications and timelines, but I tuned him out. I was watching Elena, seeing her clearly for maybe the first time. She wasn't the woman I'd fallen in love with. Maybe she never had been. Maybe I'd been in love with an illusion, a carefully crafted performance designed to secure her future. After the meeting, I drove to my parents' house. I needed to see them one more time before I left, needed to give them a chance to do the right thing. My mother answered the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Marcus! I'm so glad you came. We've been worried sick about you." I walked into the living room and found them sitting together on the couch, sharing a beer like nothing had happened. Like Danny hadn't destroyed my life. Like our family wasn't falling apart. "Marcus," my father said, muting the television. "Son, come sit down. Let's talk." "I'm leaving," I said simply. "I'm taking a job overseas. I'll be gone for a while. The kind that pays better than anything you'll ever make working for someone else's company." "Marcus," my mother said, "you can't just run away from this. Elena needs support right now. She's carrying a grandchild." The silence that followed was deafening. My father set down his beer slowly. "These things happen in marriages," my mother said. "People make mistakes. But family is forever." I looked at the three of them, my parents flanking my brother like bodyguards, protecting him from the consequences of his choices. And I realized they'd already made their decision. They were choosing him over me, choosing the easier path over the right path. "You're right, Mom. Family is forever. That's what makes this so unforgivable." "Marcus, wait. Look, I know you're hurt. But Elena and we didn't plan for this to happen. We fell in love. Sometimes that's just how life works." "And you think that makes it better? You think that makes it romantic instead of just pathetic?" Danny stood up, his jaw set. "I think it makes it real. I think it makes it something worth fighting for." "Then fight for it," I said quietly. "Because when I come back, I'm going to destroy both of you. I'm going to take everything you think you've won, and I'm going to burn it to the ground, and then I'm going to build something better on the ashes." My father laughed. Actually laughed. Marcus, you're being dramatic. This family has survived worse than a little marital trouble. This isn't marital trouble, Dad. This is betrayal, and you've all chosen to be part of it. I left that night and didn't look back. 2 days later, I was on a plane to Germany for training before deployment to Afghanistan. I carried with me a single suitcase, a new identity as a single man, and a burning need for revenge that would sustain me through everything that was coming. The last thing I did before leaving was set up an automatic monthly payment to Rodriguez. He would keep watching, keep documenting, keep building the case I would need when I returned. Because I was going to return, and when I did, they would learn that some betrayals carry a price that compounds with interest over time. 10 years. 10 years of rebuilding myself from the ground up in places where weakness meant death and strength was measured by what you could endure. 10 years of military discipline, engineering projects in war zones, and learning that pain could be transformed into power if you were willing to do the work. I came back to a world that had moved on without me, but I hadn't moved on from anything. Every slight, every betrayal, every moment of humiliation. I'd carried it all with me, refined it, sharpened it into something useful. Rodriguez had done his job well. The reports came monthly, like clockwork. Elena and Danny had gotten married 6 months after my divorce was finalized. The child, a daughter named Sophie, was biologically mine according to court-ordered paternity testing, but I'd signed away my parental rights before deployment. Elena had argued for child support, but Patricia had negotiated that away in exchange for my complete severance from their lives. My parents had welcomed Danny and Elena as a couple, hosting family gatherings where they played happy family with my daughter. My sister Jessica had sided with them too, arguing that Marcus abandoned his responsibilities and that Danny had stepped up to be a father. But the most interesting development was what had happened to the business. Without my leadership and vision, it had stagnated. Danny wasn't built for the strategic thinking required to grow a company. He was a competent foreman, but he lacked the killer instinct needed to compete in the modern construction market. They'd lost several major contracts and were barely staying afloat. I'd met Sarah Chin in a field hospital in Kabul after an IED nearly took my leg off during a rescue operation. She was a trauma surgeon, brilliant and focused, with family money from a tech fortune and an interest in infrastructure development. We'd stayed in touch after my recovery, and our professional relationship had evolved into something deeper. Sarah understood revenge. Her family had been burned by business partners before, and she appreciated the patience required for proper retribution. "You want to buy them out or destroy them?" she asked over dinner at her family's estate in California. "Both," I said. "I want them to sell to me at a loss, thinking they're escaping a sinking ship. Then I want them to watch me turn it into something they never could have imagined." It took 2 years of careful maneuvering. Sarah's investment group began acquiring shares in the construction company through shell corporations and third parties. We bought out small investors, acquired debt, and slowly tightened the noose around my family's necks. The beauty of it was that they never saw it coming. To them, I was still the broken man who'd fled town in shame. They had no idea I'd returned with resources, connections, and a decade of strategic thinking honed by military planning and international project management. The final confrontation came on a Tuesday, 10 years to the day after I'd discovered their betrayal. I'd arranged for a routine board meeting to discuss the company's financial difficulties. My father, now 72 and tired, had agreed to consider selling to Sarah's investment group to avoid bankruptcy. I arrived at the conference room 15 minutes late, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than Danny made in a month. The look on their faces when I walked in was worth every moment of the past decade. "Sorry I'm late," I said, taking the seat at the head of the table. Traffic was terrible. My father's face had gone completely white. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "I'm here for the board meeting, Dad. As the majority shareholder of Chen Industries Construction Group, I thought I should participate in the acquisition discussion." I opened my briefcase and distributed copies of the ownership documents. Over the past 2 years, Chen Industries has acquired 68% of the outstanding shares of Thompson Construction. As of this morning, I am the controlling owner of the company that bears our family name. The silence was absolute. I could hear my mother's shallow breathing, my father's sharp intake of air, Danny's muttered, "Jesus Christ." "This is impossible," Jessica said, her voice shaking. "You can't just... You've been gone for 10 years. I've been building, Jessica. While you were all playing house with the wreckage of my old life, I was learning how to construct something permanent. Elena spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus, what do you want? I looked at her across the table. This woman who'd once been everything to me, now just another obstacle to clear from my path. She'd aged poorly. The stress of managing Danny's failures, raising a child she'd used as a weapon, and living with the guilt of her choices, had carved lines around her eyes and mouth that made her look older than her years. I want you to understand something, I said quietly. 10 years ago, you thought you were trading up. You thought Danny was a better option than me. You thought I was weak, distracted, insufficient. You gambled that I would disappear quietly and let you live happily ever after in the life I'd built. You were wrong about everything. You traded a man who was building an empire for a man who couldn't manage a corner store. You traded security for poverty. You traded a future for a fantasy. I turned back to face him. Family? You stopped being my family the day you decided my wife was more important than my trust. You stopped being my family when you made me the villain in your love story. Stop. My voice carried the authority I had learned commanding troops in combat zones. I don't want to hear about what you meant. I only care about what you did. And what you did was destroy everything I'd built, poison everyone I loved against me, and expect me to disappear quietly so you wouldn't have to face consequences. Here's what's going to happen. All of you are fired, effective immediately. Your shares will be purchased at current market value, which thanks to your mismanagement is about 15% of what they were worth when I left. You have 30 days to vacate any company properties, including the house Dad and Mom are living in, since it's owned by the company as an executive benefit. Family? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Where was family when I needed support? Where was family when I was being betrayed by the two people I trusted most? Where was family when you all chose to celebrate their relationship instead of condemning their betrayal? You made your choice 10 years ago. You chose them over me. You chose comfort over justice. You chose the easy lie over the difficult truth. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. Elena was crying now. Not the pretty tears she used to shed when she wanted sympathy, but ugly, desperate sobs that spoke to real fear. Sophie is the daughter you used as a weapon against me. The daughter you taught to call another man daddy, while her real father was bleeding in foreign countries. The daughter you raised to believe I abandoned her instead of the truth, that I was driven away by betrayal. But you're right about one thing, Elena. I am thinking about Sophie. That's why I've established a trust fund for her education. She'll have opportunities you could never provide, but she'll have them in spite of you, not because of you. Danny stood up, his face red with anger and desperation. You can't destroy an entire family because of a mistake. A mistake? I turned back to face him one final time. Danny, a mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is saying something thoughtless in anger. What you did was make a series of deliberate choices over the course of 3 years to systematically destroy my life while pretending to be my brother. This is a restraining order. None of you are to contact me directly. All future communication will go through lawyers. Any attempts to interfere with my business operations will result in additional legal action. 10 years ago, you thought you'd won. You thought you'd gotten everything you wanted while the weak, distracted husband disappeared into irrelevance. Today you're learning that some people don't disappear. Some people use their pain as fuel. Some people come back stronger. The door closed behind me with a soft click, sealing away that chapter of my life forever. The weeks following the confrontation were strange. I'd spent so many years planning for that moment, building toward that day, that its aftermath felt almost anticlimactic. There was satisfaction, certainly, but also an unexpected emptiness, the way a musician might feel after finishing a symphony that had consumed years of their life. Sarah found me on the balcony of our hotel suite that evening, staring out at the city lights with a glass of scotch that had gone untouched for an hour. "Hello," I said honestly. "I thought I'd feel more triumphant, I guess." "Revenge is like surgery," she said. "Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it saves your life, but it always leaves scars." She was right. The confrontation had been necessary, a wound that needed to be cleaned before it could heal properly. But now that it was done, I had to figure out who I was beyond the man who'd been betrayed, beyond the man who'd planned revenge, beyond the man who'd spent a decade rebuilding himself for a single moment of retribution. The business side of things moved quickly. Within 60 days, my family had sold their shares and vacated company properties. Danny found work as a foreman for a smaller construction company at a fraction of his previous salary. My parents moved into a modest apartment and survived primarily on Social Security and the small pension Dad had managed to save. Elena had tried to reach out through mutual acquaintances, but I'd meant what I said about no direct contact. According to Rodriguez, who I'd kept on retainer, she'd taken a job as a receptionist at a dental office and was struggling to make ends meet on her own. The strangest part was the silence. For 10 years, everything I'd done had been in service of eventual confrontation with them. Now that it was over, I had to learn how to live without that driving purpose. Connieers. Sarah helped. She understood the complexity of what I was going through, because she'd walked a similar path with her own family's betrayers. We spent months traveling, working on international projects together, building something new that had nothing to do with my past. You know what the real victory is? She asked me one evening as we sat on a beach in Thailand, watching the sunset after completing a infrastructure project for a resort chain. You didn't become them. You could have. The anger, the betrayal, the desire for revenge, it could have turned you into something twisted and cruel. Instead, you used it to become stronger, more successful, more capable. You alchemized poison into power. She was right. The man who discovered his wife's betrayal 10 years ago had been soft in some ways, naive, trusting to a fault. The man sitting on that beach was harder, certainly, but he was also more focused, more strategic, more aware of his own worth and capabilities. 6 months after the confrontation, I received an unexpected call. Patricia, my lawyer, had news about Sophie. She's been asking questions, Patricia said. Elena brought her to my office yesterday. She wants to know about her real father. Nothing per your instructions. But Marcus, she's 12 now. She's old enough to understand that the story she's been told doesn't add up. I was quiet for a long moment. Sophie had been a weapon used against me, but she was also an innocent victim of her parents' choices. She'd grown up believing I'd abandoned her, but she was beginning to realize there might be more to the story. I think, she said carefully, that you have an opportunity to be the father you never got to be, but only if you can separate her from her mother's betrayal in your mind. It took me another month to make the decision. I arranged to meet Sophie at a neutral location, a park where she could feel safe and leave if she wanted to. Elena would be nearby, but not involved in the conversation. Casey, she looked like me. That was the first thing I noticed. She had my dark hair, my stubborn jawline, my habit of chewing her lower lip when she was thinking. But she also had Elena's eyes, and when she looked at me, I saw fear mixed with curiosity. I prepared for this question, but it was still difficult to answer honestly, without poisoning her relationship with her mother completely. Sometimes, adults make choices that hurt each other very badly, I said. When you were born, your mother and I couldn't find a way to be together without causing more hurt. I thought the best thing I could do for you was to make sure you were taken care of financially, and let the adults in your life focus on raising you without conflict. The knife twisted, but I kept my voice steady. That was never true. I've thought about you every single day for 12 years. I've wondered what you look like, what you're interested in, what makes you laugh. I've missed you more than you could possibly understand. If you want to. But it has to be your choice, Sophie. Not your mother's choice. Not mine. Yours. We started meeting once a month. Just coffee and conversation, getting to know each other slowly. I learned that she was brilliant at mathematics, loved science fiction novels, and played soccer with a fierce determination that reminded me of myself at that age. More importantly, I learned that she was nothing like her mother. She was direct, honest, and had an innate sense of justice that had probably made Elena's version of events difficult for her to accept. I always knew something was wrong with the story, she told me during one of our meetings. Mom would get upset whenever I asked too many questions about you. And Danny, he tries, but he's not really my dad, you know. He doesn't understand how my mind works. Over time, our relationship deepened. I was careful not to badmouth Elena or Danny, but I also didn't lie when Sophie asked direct questions about what had happened. She was smart enough to read between the lines and strong enough to handle the truth. The real breakthrough came when Sophie asked if she could spend a weekend with Sarah and me. Elena fought it at first, but legally, I had rights as Sophie's biological father, and Patricia made that clear. That weekend, I saw glimpses of the life I might have had if things had been different. Sophie fit seamlessly into our world. She was fascinated by Sarah's medical stories, impressed by the construction projects we'd completed, and eager to learn about everything from business strategy to international relations. "I want to be like you," she told me on Sunday evening as we drove her back to Elena's apartment. I felt something in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, uncomplicated joy mixed with fierce paternal pride. "You can be anything you want to be, Sophie. You're smarter than I was at your age, and you're growing up with advantages I never had." That night, after we dropped Sophie off, Sarah and I sat in our kitchen, talking about the future. "Right now, your life is about what you've overcome, what you've achieved, in spite of what was done to you. But being Sophie's father, really being her father, that's going to be about what you can build, what you can create, what you can give to the world through her." She was right. Sophie represented something I hadn't expected to find, a future that wasn't defined by my past. A relationship built on love and respect, rather than revenge and retribution. Bashka. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was profound. Having Sophie in my life gave me a reason to look forward instead of backward, to build instead of just conquering. I started thinking about legacy, not just the business empire I'd created, but the values and wisdom I could pass on to my daughter. Elena fought the changing dynamic at first. She'd called Patricia complaining about Sophie spending too much time with me, about the influence Sarah and I were having on her daughter's aspirations and worldview. But Sophie was old enough to make her own choices, and she consistently chose to spend more time with us. The breaking point came when Sophie was 14. She'd been accepted into a prestigious STEM summer program at MIT, but Elena couldn't afford the tuition and fees. When Sophie asked me to pay for it, Elena exploded. "You can't just buy her love," she screamed during a heated phone call that Sophie overheard. "You left us with nothing, and now you want to play the hero?" "Dad, I heard what Mom said about you buying my love. Is that what you're doing?" The question broke my heart because I could hear the confusion and pain in her voice, the same confusion I'd felt when my own family had turned against me. "Sophie, love isn't something that can be bought or sold. What I'm doing is trying to give you opportunities that I believe you deserve, regardless of what happened between your mother and me. But if it makes you uncomfortable, if it feels wrong to you, then we'll find another way." "It doesn't feel wrong to me," she said quietly. "It feels like what a father should do for his daughter. But Mom makes it sound like something bad." "Your mother is hurt and scared," I said, choosing my words carefully. "She's worried about losing you, and sometimes when people are afraid, they say things they don't really mean." The question was so perceptive, so cutting, that it took my breath away. At 14, Sophie was already seeing through the manipulation and emotional control that had defined Elena's approach to relationships. "I think she loves you the only way she knows how," I said finally. "But that doesn't mean her way is healthy or right." 6 months later, Sophie made a decision that surprised everyone. She asked to live with Sarah and me full-time. Elena fought it viciously, hiring lawyers and threatening to drag us all through a custody battle that would expose every painful detail of our past. But Sophie was 16 by then, old enough in our state to choose which parent she wanted to live with. More importantly, she was articulate enough to explain her reasoning to the family court judge. "Your Honor," she said, standing in that courtroom with a poise that reminded me of Sarah, "I've spent my entire life watching the adults around me make decisions based on anger, fear, and pride. My biological father made mistakes, my mother made mistakes, and everyone paid a price for those mistakes. But I've also watched my father spend the last 4 years trying to build a relationship with me based on honesty, respect, and genuine care for my future. He's never asked me to choose sides. He's never badmouthed my mother or stepfather. He simply tried to be the best father he could be, with the time and opportunities he's been given." The judge awarded me primary custody, with Elena receiving generous visitation rights. Elena was devastated, but I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete, uncomplicated victory that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with love. 5 years later, I stood in the audience at Sophie's graduation from MIT, watching her accept her degree in civil engineering with a focus on sustainable infrastructure development. Sarah sat beside me, her hand in mine, both of us beaming with pride as our daughter, because that's what Sophie had become to both of us, walked across that stage. Elena was there too, sitting several rows behind us with Danny. Their relationship had survived my return and the custody change, but it had cost them dearly. Danny had never been able to provide the stability and success Elena had expected when she'd chosen him over me. They lived modestly, struggled financially, and had watched helplessly as their daughter gravitated toward the life and opportunities I could provide. But the real victory wasn't their struggle. It was Sophie's success. She'd grown into a remarkable young woman, brilliant, compassionate, driven, and possessed of an integrity that had been forged in the crucible of family dysfunction and emerged stronger for it. After the ceremony, Sophie found us in the crowd of families and threw her arms around both Sarah and me. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Either of you. You did this yourself," I told her. "We just made sure you had the tools and opportunities. The work, the intelligence, the determination. That's all you." That evening, at the celebration dinner, Sophie raised her glass for a toast. "To my dad," she said, looking at me with eyes that held no trace of the fear and confusion I'd seen in them years earlier, "who taught me that the best revenge against betrayal isn't destruction. It's building something so beautiful and strong that it makes the betrayal irrelevant. And to my mom, who taught me, though not in the way she intended, that love without honesty is just manipulation, and that families aren't defined by blood or convenience, but by choice and commitment." It was a gracious toast, one that acknowledged everyone's role in her development without excusing anyone's failures. In that moment, I realized that Sophie had achieved something I'd never quite managed. She'd learned from everyone's mistakes without being defined by them. Later that night, Sarah and I walked through the campus where our daughter had spent 4 years preparing for a future that would be entirely her own. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different?" Sarah asked. "If Elena hadn't betrayed you, if your family had supported you, if you'd never left?" I considered the question seriously. "I think about it sometimes, but honestly, I can't imagine a different path leading to a better outcome. The pain, the betrayal, the years of rebuilding, they all led to this moment. They led to Sophie, to us, to the life we've built together. About the betrayal? About the pain they caused? No, I can't regret that, because it taught me who I really was underneath all the softness and trust. It showed me what I was capable of when everything was stripped away. The man Elena married was weak in ways I didn't understand. He was successful, but he was also naive, easily manipulated, too trusting. The man who came back from overseas, who built this company, who fought for his daughter, he's someone I actually respect. I thought about my family. My parents struggling in their small apartment, Danny working construction for other people's companies, Elena raising a brilliant daughter she'd never be able to fully understand or support. "No," I said finally. "They made choices. They chose comfort over justice, betrayal over loyalty, lies over truth. They got exactly what they chose, just not in the way they expected. It's not really about them anymore. For years, your entire identity was built around what they'd done to you and what you were going to do to them. But now it's about what we've built together, what Sophie's going to accomplish, what legacy we're creating." She was right. The company now employed over 300 people and had international contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Sophie was launching her career with opportunities and connections that would allow her to make a real difference in the world. Sarah and I were planning our wedding for the following spring, not as a response to past betrayal, but as a celebration of genuine love and partnership. The boy who'd been betrayed by his wife and brother was gone. The man who'd spent a decade planning revenge was also gone. What remained was someone I'd never expected to become: a father, a partner, a builder of things that mattered. As we walked back to our hotel, I thought about the letter I'd received from my mother the previous week. She was 78 now, living on a fixed income, and had written to ask if we could reconcile for the sake of family. I'd read the letter twice and thrown it away. Not out of anger that fire had burned out years ago, but out of simple disinterest. She was asking me to pretend the past hadn't happened, to welcome back into my life people who had shown me exactly who they were when it mattered most. But I was no longer the man who needed their approval or acceptance. I'd built a family with people who chose me deliberately, loved me honestly, and supported me unconditionally. Why would I dilute that with people who had proven they would sacrifice me for their own comfort? Sophie had asked me about the letter, and I'd been honest with her about it. "I miss the grandparents I thought I had," I'd replied. "But I don't miss the people they actually turned out to be. And honestly, Sophie, you've got Sarah's parents, who love you completely, and have never asked you to pretend that painful things didn't happen. That's worth more than a dozen grandparents who love you conditionally." She'd nodded, understanding in the way that children of complicated families often do. Besides, I'd added, you're going to have children someday, and they're going to have grandparents who love them without reservation, who support their parents' relationship, who value honesty and integrity above convenience. You're going to break this cycle entirely. That conversation had been more healing than any confrontation with my parents could have been. It was the moment I realized that my story wasn't about overcoming betrayal. It was about building something better from the ground up. Standing in that hotel room, looking out at the city lights, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete peace with my choices, and absolute confidence in my future. The weight of betrayal that had driven me for so many years was gone, replaced by the far more powerful force of love, purpose, and legacy. Elena had thought she was trading up when she chose Danny over me. My family had thought they were choosing the easier path when they sided with the betrayers instead of the betrayed. They'd all been thinking small, choosing short-term comfort over long-term integrity. But I'd learned something they never understood. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's building a life so fulfilling, so successful, so rich with genuine love and respect that the people who betrayed you become irrelevant. Not because you've destroyed them, but because you've created something so much better that they simply don't matter anymore. Sophie would graduate from MIT and go on to build infrastructure projects that would serve communities for generations. Sarah and I would grow old together, partners in every sense of the word, building a legacy of businesses, relationships, and values that would outlast us both. And somewhere across town, Elena would continue struggling to understand why her brilliant daughter preferred spending time with the father she'd tried to erase, while Danny would continue working for other people's dreams because he'd never learned to build his own. They'd gotten exactly what they'd chosen. I built exactly what I'd envisioned. And in the end, that was the most complete victory of all. Not just overcoming betrayal, but becoming someone worthy of genuine love, respect, and legacy. Someone who could stand in a hotel room, looking out at a world full of possibilities, and know with absolute certainty that the best parts of his story were still being written. The man who'd been betrayed was gone. The man who'd sought revenge was gone. What remained was a father, a partner, and a builder of things that would endure long after the pain of betrayal had been forgotten entirely. And that, I realized, was what true healing looked like. Not the absence of scars, but the presence of something so much better that the scars became simply part of the foundation upon which greatness was built.